Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome back to The Last Symptom. I'm Brian Barnett, the creator and host of The Last Symptom, and I'm pleased to have you here with me. It's been a few weeks since we've seen each other. The topics we're going to discuss in this episode: why is an urge or a desire to try to figure out how to deal with other people a problem? We're also going to talk about there not being any difference whatsoever between total strangers and people we're in relationships with. That can be people we're in romantic relationships with, in familiar family relationships with. I'm going to talk about stop reveling in sadness. Stop doing it. Stop reveling in sadness. Do you view life as happening to you? Or do you view the majority of things in your life as something you're responsible for? Going to talk about power over thoughts, and we're going to discuss some examples of passive-aggressive communication behavior styles. But before we do all that, we have to do the disclaimer and the musical introduction, so don't go nowhere. I'll be right here once that ends. I'm Brian Barnett. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a doctor. I have no legal license in any field of psychology. But I did live a large part of my life with borderline personality disorder unknowingly. And I really did rid myself of the disorder completely and permanently. Through that, I've become an expert on issues involving emotional health. I accept no responsibility whatsoever for your feelings, thoughts, behaviors, decisions, and actions, including your decision to watch or listen to this show at all. But I do hope you might benefit yourself from the insights I share. So, as I had mentioned, it's been a while since the last time you and I talked. If you don't like so much time passing between when you and I talk, consider joining us over there on our online community on Locals. I'm on there all the time, and one of the real nice things that we do over there on Locals is that we do live streams on Mondays. And so folks who are part of our online community have not had to go several weeks without getting their dose of The Last Symptom. How do you join us on The Last Symptom online community on Locals? Well, you can go to thelastsymptom.locals.com in your web browser, or you can download the really spiffy locals.com app from the App Store to your phone or your device, and then just search for The Last Symptom by Brian Barnett within. There's another exciting new announcement I've got about our Locals community. Maybe you've been somebody who's been interested in my 2-week intensive fundamentals course. That it's all for people who want a real jump start to their authentic recovery. All the insights that I needed to have in order to escape borderline personality disorder and my own emotional disorder. And until now, that course has been available as a one-time purchase. You know, you enroll, you purchase enrollment into the course in a one-time thing. I've now been making the fundamentals course available for purchase chapter by chapter on our Locals group. What that means is that instead of paying for the course in one lump sum, those who are interested can now go to Locals. You don't have to be a supporting member on Locals to do this, and you can just go in and purchase each chapter by itself. Now, I will tell you that in the long run, this comes out to costing you more than if you were to just enroll in the course and pay the bulk amount. But it is a possibility for those who who that arrangement might be easier for. So if you'd like more details on that, run over, become a member on Locals, and I will pin the instructions for how to access the Fundamentals course at the top of the group. And I should tell you that the entire Fundamentals course is not yet uploaded to Locals, but the first 3 days of the course are. So there's 3 chapters per day, 3 days. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9 chapters of the course are indeed uploaded to Locals and ready for purchase chapter by chapter. Something I'll add to that is that once you purchase you have unlimited access to it forever, for as long as you have access to Locals. And so that is a pretty nice deal. When you just purchase the Fundamentals course in its entirety, there's a limited, I think it's a 7-month access to the course. And I did that to provoke people or encourage people, I reckon is a better word. Encourage people to not devalue it, not take it seriously. I want people to take it seriously. I want you to set aside time for it out of your life, devote your attention and energy to it. So that's why I put that 7-month limited access there when you purchase the course in its entirety. However, if you purchase it chapter by chapter on Locals, it's yours for as long as you maintain access to Locals. Let's see. I think that's all for announcements. I hope you guys have all been doing well. I had the flu for almost a solid 2 weeks, and before that I was out in the back country with my buddy Jeffrey, and in the midst of all that, I've been very active on our Locals group and with live streams and in other aspects of my work here with The Last Symptom. I did just learn today that apparently the Last Symptom podcast, this podcast that you're either watching or listening to, is in the top 1% of all the world's podcasts. Now, I would imagine that has a lot to do with just the longevity of this show, but it's still pretty exciting, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's exciting for me. All right, let's get into our discussion. Stop reveling in sadness. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about purposely reveling in gloom and doom and sadness and despair. I used to do this. There's a certain sweetness when in viewing yourself as a victim of life. And the arts often get misused in this way. So I would purposely write and search out these gloomy, despairing songs and poems and artwork and things of this nature to revel in sadness. I saw a girl reading poetry the other day on some social media thing. And I watched it, and it just really put me off. I recognized my past self in her a lot, reveling in sadness and gloom. She was doing this by the tone of her voice, the sad music in the background, and the words she was using in this poetry as she was reading it. I don't know if she wrote the poem or if she found it somewhere, but part of the poem went like this. In English we say, I don't know what we do from here. In poetry we say, things have been broken into so many pieces, I don't know if they can be put back together again. Now, do you notice how I read that? That was an example of somebody not reveling in gloomy, despairing sadness. That's not how she read it. Would you like to hear how she read it? And see if you can notice the difference. Here, I'll read it the way I did it again. And then I'll read it in the way that she read it. See if you can pick up the difference. In English, we say, I don't know what we do from here. In poetry, we say, things have been broken into so many pieces. I don't know if they can ever be put back together again. All right, that's somebody who is not reveling in gloomy, despairing sadness. Now, here's a person who is reveling in gloomy, despairing sadness. Here's how she read it. In English, we say, I don't know what we do from here. Now, imagine sad music playing in the background while she's reading this poetry like this. In poetry, we say, things have been broken into so many pieces. I don't know if they can ever be put back together again. That is a person reveling in gloomy, fake sadness and gloom. It's reveling in sadness. It's using emotions, looking upon emotions, and using emotions as a manipulation tool. People confuse pathetic, gloomy sadness as being the foundation of poetry and the arts as existing for manipulating people's feelings by faking them yourself. Pathetic, gloomy sadness is not the true foundation of the arts, and the arts do not exist as a manipulation tool. It's interesting that if you talk to any great actor, or I reckon we can't just walk right up and talk to them, can we? But if you watch interviews with fantastic, really great actors, to the last one of them, they will say they are not faking emotions when they're acting. The reason why they are masters at their craft is because they're not faking the emotions. They're doing something to tap into the emotions for real. And the emotions are attempting to reflect the true nature of some aspect of life. So, not a manipulation tool, a narrative tool to reflect something real. Pathetic, gloomy sadness is not the true foundation of any of the arts. The arts do not exist as a manipulation tool. Sadness, if you think about it, is simply one emotion out of millions that the arts exist for. And the arts exist to communicate genuine feelings and reflect life in authentic ways. They don't exist for manipulating people. They exist for reflecting truth, the true realities of life. There's nothing authentic about what this girl was doing reading her quote-unquote poetry. That is reveling in gloomy, fake sadness. If by default you're using the arts to revel in gloomy sadness and despair, you do not understand the true purpose of the arts, and the problem is in your thinking and your attitudes. So if that's what your attitude is, that sadness is the foundation of poetry or the foundation of great music, you need to broaden your mind and your attitudes. You are misusing the arts. Conan O'Brien, famous talk show host here in the United States, famously said, "Cynicism is my least favorite quality." Well, I would say that my least favorite qualities, among my least favorite qualities, is despair and fake helplessness. Least favorite qualities. Right below arrogance and haughtiness. And this is going to lead us into a discussion about power over thoughts, which we're going to be discussing here in a little bit. So you may say, well, I can't help it. If I feel sad, that's true. Can't control what you feel. But notice what the upcoming subject is going to be. Not power over your feelings, power over your thoughts. Why is that important? Because where do your feelings come from? What gives your feelings birth? It's your thoughts. Do we have control over our thoughts? Yes, we have full control over what we continue to allow ourselves to think. And so, if a person is walking around reveling in gloomy despair and fake sadness, what is happening there? What is happening is that the person is choosing their thoughts, and they're choosing what to feed their thoughts with. What are they feeding their thoughts with? The gloomiest, most pathetic, sad and gloomy poetry and music and paintings. And so they are choosing that. They are choosing what to feed their brain on. And then, what do they want? They want attention, don't they? And sympathy. Attention and sympathy for something that they themselves are doing by choice. Do you see it? Unhealthy people do this. What is at the root of emotional disorder? An inappropriate perspective or attitude towards feelings, self, and life. But let's stop at feelings. An inappropriate perspective toward the nature of feelings. An inappropriate perspective toward the nature of feelings. And what are they doing? They're viewing emotions as a manipulation tool. That's interesting, isn't it? Do you think healthy people do that? View emotions as a manipulation tool. And you know, it's interesting that when I was unhealthy, I was suspicious of anybody emoting around me. I was suspicious. Why do you figure that I was suspicious of people emoting around me when I was unhealthy? What attitude or perspective did I have toward feelings? That they're a manipulation tool. So if that's my perspective, that emotions are a manipulation tool, why then would I look around at other people and be suspicious when they emote? What do I think they're doing? I think they're trying to manipulate me. So it's an inappropriate attitude or perspective toward the very nature of feelings. Unhealthy people, the way you will see them use emotions are actually a reflection of their attitude about the nature of feelings. But healthy people don't do that. Healthy people value feelings in a genuine way. They see great value in genuine emotions. They don't view them as a manipulation tool. When other people emote, first of all, if it's genuine, then they inherently place great importance or value on the emotional experience that somebody else is having. They're able to sympathize and empathize with that person. My daughter, about a month or 2 months ago, was doing this fake emotion type thing, fake emoting. And I don't know if she just kind of got curious about it and was trying to do that, but I had to have a conversation with her. I said, you know, feelings are so valuable and so important that they are not to be used that way. It is not appropriate to fake emotions in order to use them as like a manipulation tool. That's not proper. And she says, but why? I don't understand. What's the big deal? I said, because they're that valuable. They have that much value. They're that important that to use them in an inappropriate way, in a fake way, is to, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it's almost like using something wholly in vain, right? Or like blasphemous. It's almost blasphemous because they're that special. They're that valuable. They're something that we as human beings don't share with any other living creatures, physical living creatures, I should say. They're a special gift. You know, the last thing that we should want to do is to take something that is so beautiful, such a gift, and then misuse it, or use it in a way that's not intended to be used, or to use it in a degrading way, which is what that is doing. But we're going to get into this conversation about power over thoughts. Let's talk about how to deal with other people. So you ever get that notion in your head? Like, I don't know how to deal with so-and-so. I'm trying to figure out how to deal with so-and-so. That idea ever pop in your head? Maybe it's somebody at work, right? And they're problematic, difficult to work around. And maybe the idea pops in your head, I got to figure out how to deal with this person. Why is that a problem? The problem is because that thinking comes from a desire for control over other people. What's the best you can do in a situation where somebody is difficult to work around, or difficult to live with, or difficult to encounter from time to time? What's the best you've got in life? The best you've got is control over yourself. That's it. That's the best you've got. So you can try to figure out how to deal with yourself around that person, but it is not appropriate. It is not that thinking that I need to figure out how to deal with this person. That thinking is not rooted in emotional health. That thinking is rooted in emotional unhealth. Why? Because it does not recognize and respect where your rights, responsibility, and authority begin and end. Where do they begin and end? They begin and end with you. So what's the right question to be asking yourself when you're around somebody who makes life a little difficult? The right thing to be thinking is, how do I deal with myself? How do I deal with myself in this situation? Notice that does not reflect any desire whatsoever or delusion whatsoever that you have some control over other people, or that you possess rights over other people, or anything like that. No, it really does identify where your rights, responsibility, and authority do exist and don't exist. But back to this thinking, this desire for control over other people. How do I deal with this person? You see that thinking? What attitude does that reflect? Remember the law of genuine attitude reflection. If that desire exists in you to try to figure out how to deal with the person, what does the law of genuine attitude reflection say? It says, well, that desire has to reflect some true attitude that you live with, or true thinking or perspective that you live with. It doesn't lie. So what is the true thinking or the attitude reflected by a desire to figure out how to deal with somebody else? It reflects the thinking that they're not playing their parts in our story in the way that we want. That's why we're questioning the best way to deal with them. which for unhealthy people is just code for controlling them so as to get the preferred result out of them according to who? According to our personal desires, right? That is to say, what we want them to be, how we want them to contribute to our story. This mindset, again, is not harmonious with something that I call the law of individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority that many of you have heard me talk about. We just talked about it a little bit. But what's worse is that it reflects an attitude that disregards and devalues people as individuals. Do you see how that works? They're not behaving or being what I want them to be or behave. You know, if I had full control over the universe, this is not how they would be. And they're not behaving in that way. So how do I deal with them so that they behave and become something different? Do you see how that is not viewing somebody as a standalone individual with their own individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority, the same ones that you enjoy over your personal life? No, when we fail to assign, or it's not that we're assigning it, but when we fail to acknowledge other people's individual inherent rights, responsibilities, and authority over themselves, what does that mean? As soon as we begin to fail to recognize that other people possess that, what does that mean? It means that we are beginning to view ourselves as having rights, responsibility, and authority over them that we don't have. That's pretty bad, isn't it? It devalues them as individuals. So they're not a standalone person with the same individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority that I possess. Nope, they're just an extension of me, or a part of my story. I'm the real person, they're not. I have those rights, they don't. Because I know how better and they don't. So you see it. It's an attitude built on the false premise that other people primarily exist for us. That goes back to the conversation about suppliers and deniers, right? Unhealthy people view everybody as either suppliers or deniers of their own wants and needs. And that's what is happening when we look at somebody and say to ourselves, we begin that thinking, how do I deal with this person? How do I deal with this person? So the proper attitude then is not how do I deal with some other person, but rather based on the choices some other person is making and has a right to make, how do I deal with myself? What decisions and actions must I myself take based on these completely uncontrollable realities? That is to say, other people and their choices. This uncontrollable universe that goes on outside of me. What decisions and actions can I take for myself? You see, there is no dealing with other people. There is no such thing. There's only dealing with ourselves. That's where our individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority are. That's where they exist. So we look at a difficult situation or somebody who makes life difficult for us, and the best we've got is, what decisions can I make for myself given these realities? That's what you've got. The notion or the thinking of dealing with other people is rooted in a false belief for the right of control and the ability for control over other people. It's the attitude that your preferences and thinking and ways of doing things are not just as flawed and prone to failure as anybody else. In other words, it inherently reflects an attitude of superiority. So there's no such thing as dealing with other people. There's only people making decisions for how they will deal with themselves given the realities around them. It's the best you got. Somebody on our group here recently said, my observation is that some people get comfortable with suffering. When they are living their lives, it's almost like they don't want to learn. They don't want to learn what they're doing wrong. They're not even receptive to the notion that that could be the answer to things. The fact that they're doing something wrong. The fundamental problem for this is that I've noticed that in life, people usually walk around with one of two different attitude systems or ways of viewing reality. And I'm going to share them with you today. These people who seem stuck in life, repeating cycles where things never seem to perfectly work out, everything seems difficult, and the results of their efforts always are less than ideal. The people who seem stuck in these repeating cycles like this, if you'll notice, they're the ones who walk around with the attitude, a life perspective that everything is happening to them. Maybe you're one of these people. I used to be one of these people. I tell you that because that's good news. The fact that I was one of those people, but I'm not now, means that people can escape this type of thinking. You see, they don't realize it, but their entire life attitude is built on contradictions. I see this with my brother even today. Because the same people who view life as happening to them are the same people who live trying to control everything around them at all times. We just got done talking about one aspect of that, didn't we? What was that one aspect? How do I deal with this person? This person is creating difficulties in my life. How do I deal with that person? What did we say? There is no dealing with that person. There's just how do you deal with yourself around that person. That's what you've got. But the same person who would look at a situation like that and say, how do I deal with this person? In other words, how do I get them to be what I want them to be? How do I control them? These are the same people who also exist in a reality where things happen to them. Now, I'm going to try to explain this so that you can really grasp what I'm saying. So at the same time that they are the only real character in the story, and everything else only exists for their story, simultaneously, concurrently, they view themselves as being helpless victims that life just happens to. They don't share any responsibility in it. They're powerless. They're just walking about in life, receiving life. All right? For example, if a dog isn't cooperating, that is because it's not just that the dog isn't cooperating, but life isn't cooperating. It's interesting that the person who brought this topic up, is a dog behavior specialist. And this person works with people to try to help them learn proper ways for them to behave around their dogs. Now notice what this person is not trying to help them do. The person is not so much trying to help the clients control the dog, but rather control themselves properly so that the dog responds properly to the way they behave, the owners. Isn't that interesting? Because that's what we were just talking about. You can't deal with people. And this is much truer than dogs. We have dominion over dogs. We don't have dominion over other people. So if it's true for dogs, where the number one thing that a person has to learn in order to be a good dog owner is how do I behave? How do I behave? Not how do I make my dog behave, but primarily how do I behave to encourage the right behaviors from my dog if that's true for dogs, how much truer do you think that is for human beings? Creatures we do not have dominion over. Of course, it's the reality. It's the reality whether you recognize it or not. When you're around other people, you can look at the situation and say, how do I deal with myself given these realities? The realities that this other person is putting out into the world. But how do I get them to stop doing that is not really an option. Unless we're talking you're on your private property, right? That's your personal life. That falls into the boundaries of your personal life. You can make them leave your property and these sorts of things. You can call the police and get them removed from your house, for example. But again, your house, your property, is just an extension that the rights, responsibility, and authority that you possess over yourself extend to your personal property. But once you leave your personal property, then what do you got? The best you got is, how do I deal with myself? But back to these people who view life as happening to them. In this system of thinking, you see, if you are walking around and your attitude or your perspective about life is that it's just happening to you, what does that mean? It means that you're fundamentally powerless to the situations that you experience. So that's one attitude system or way of viewing reality that people do possess, that they do live with. The other way of viewing things is that I may have no power over anything outside of my personal life. I just kind of described it. But I have complete power and control over anything within my personal life. Now, thinking about that attitude system, do you think that gives rise to powerlessness? Or does it give rise to powerfulness? It's pretty evident, ain't it? If I view myself as having total control over my personal life, does that make me powerless or powerful? Makes me powerful. So in this second attitude system, a way of viewing life, it recognizes that in life, it's true that there are certain things that we are powerless over. But at the same time, it recognizes the things that we are powerful over. What does that mean? It means that a person, and this is the healthy attitude system, by the way, it means that a person who's living with this healthy, accurate attitude system does not waste time on the things that they're powerless over and keeps their attention on the things that they're powerful over. What does it mean? It means they don't get involved in drama that is outside of their power, control, and individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority. Instead, their attention is, where is my individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority? That is to say, my power. And my attention stays there. So you're not wasting time and energy needlessly. When you exert energy and attention to something, it has an effect. Why? Because it's where your power truly exists. And the other side, the difference comparatively with the other type of thinking, is that energy is constantly going out the window. Energy and attention is constantly going out the window. Why? Because it's directed towards things where one does not have any power or control. And at the same time, that same unhealthy person is viewing life as just happening to them. They're just a helpless victim of whatever life throws their way. It's important to note that acknowledging one's power, one's great power, also inherently includes acknowledging one's great responsibility. You've seen the Spider-Man movies, maybe. And Uncle Ben says to Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. That is not just a nice saying, and it's not just a clever thing for a comic book, but it reflects the truth of the universe. Let me illustrate it for you. I'm driving my car, and I know that I possess the power over my body and life and car to press the brake pedal on my car. But I choose not to do it, and I crash into a telephone pole. If I'm perfectly aware of my power to press the brake on my car, and I just choose not to do it, and then I hit a telephone pole, is it possible for me to get out of my car and assign blame to the telephone pole for the crash? It's impossible, isn't it? It's absolutely impossible. The very fact that I acknowledge and recognize my power to press the brake, and I choose not to, and I hit the telephone pole, means that I take responsibility for the failure. I hit the telephone pole not because of the telephone pole, not because of the car, but because I failed to exercise power that I recognize that I possess. Whose fault was it? It was my fault. I don't get out of the car and blame the telephone pole. So now do you see how with great power comes responsibility? With any power comes responsibility. That type of person living with that attitude system is a responsible person. A person who recognizes the power of their life that they possess also recognizes the and accepts the responsibility that comes along with it. But what if you're one of these people who looks at life as happening to you? What do you accept responsibility for? Nothing. Nothing. Because you're powerless. In that attitude system, whether you press the brake or not will have no effect on the outcome. You're powerless. So you get out of the car and you do blame the telephone pole, and you blame the possum that was running across the road. You blame the car that was behind you. You blame lots of things. But it does not occur to you that you had complete power to affect the outcome. Life isn't just happening to you. When it comes to your personal life and decisions and everything, you're the impetus for everything that happens or doesn't happen. It's your responsibility. So a person with the healthy mindset where life is not just happening to me, but I'm the master of my life, my personal life, everything within the realm of my individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority. A person with that mindset is quick to identify the problems that arise from his or her own failures to live up to his or her own responsibilities. And what are our responsibilities based on? They're based on our power, the power we possess. So this person is quick to recognize when these failures happen, to take responsibility for those failures. That's a big one. A person who's walking around with the attitude that life is just happening to them does not take responsibility for their failures because they don't view themselves as possessing any power, therefore they've not failed in anything. And then this healthy person analyzes what practical things he or she can do to correct their failures and reassert control over what he or she truly has control over. That's power. So this first mentality, life just happens to me, translates into everybody walking around fundamentally powerless and viewing themselves as victims that life simply happens to. By comparison, the second mentality naturally translates into responsible, powerful people who are quick to identify what is not within their power and not waste time worrying about it. But at the same time, to quickly assume responsibility and control over things they do have power over, which is their individual selves, right? Now, I wanted to talk to you about this concept of not having this concept that total strangers, like at the grocery store, you go to the Piggly Wiggly, there's a bunch of people walking around, how those people, how your relationship with those people is no different whatsoever than any relationships you have with family members, with girlfriends, with husbands, with aunts, uncles, cousins, best friends. You say, surely there's a difference. Surely there is. Well, that's the unhealthy way of thinking. The unhealthy way of thinking says, because I'm in a relationship, the relationship grants me, here we go again. You knew it was coming, didn't you? The relationship grants me rights, responsibility, and authority over the person I'm in a relationship with. That's the thinking. That's the erroneous, unhealthy, false thinking. Now, let me reintroduce you to the concept that I just told you. Your uncles, aunts, boyfriends, husbands, girlfriends, wives, best friends are in no different position whatsoever than a total stranger that you bump into at the mall. Think about this. How do you feel compelled to talk to a total stranger at the grocery store? With some respect, right? So then you get home and you talk to your husband. Do you feel that same compulsion to speak to him with respect? What has changed? What has changed? Nothing has changed except your feelings. That's it. That's all that has changed. You understand, right, that is the only difference between a total stranger at the store and your best friend or a relative or a spouse. What is the only difference? The only difference is the feelings involved. That's it. The familiarity and the feelings involved. That's it. But as far as rights, responsibility, and authority go, do you possess them over somebody else just because you're in a relationship with them or you share a relationship with the person? The answer is no. There's no difference whatsoever in how you should talk to that person than somebody you would talk to at the store. Now, it's true you'll talk about more intimate things, right? You're not going to bump into a lady at the store and say, hey, man, golly gee, I got to tell you about these hemorrhoids I've been dealing with all week. Oh, my goodness, and this erectile dysfunction. What a thing. What do you think I should do about it? You're not going to have that conversation with a total stranger. Probably you're not. Whereas you would feel the security of having that discussion with, say, your husband. But what has changed? Is it because you suddenly possess rights over your husband that you did not possess over that lady at the store? Or responsibility? Is there some responsibility you possess? Inherent, I should say. Inherent responsibility that you possess over your husband that you do not possess over the lady at the store. How about authority? Is there some inherent authority you possess over your husband that you did not possess over the woman at the grocery store? The answer is no. Even sex, let's say any kind of sexual activity, you cannot just grab. You don't have a right, if your husband is not a willing participant, to just grab him and do whatever you want to him. Touch him wherever you want to touch him. Treat his body any way you want to treat it. Do you? Unless what? Unless he is a willing participant. Unless he chooses it for himself. Now, let's go to a total stranger at the grocery store. Does the same thing apply? The same thing applies. The same thing applies. There's no difference. It's possible. It happens. People bump into each other at the grocery store and then have a sexual experience together, right? But who gets to decide that? Each person gets to decide that. That's a crazy example, dramatic example, but hopefully it helps illustrate the point that I'm making. Just like you can't go up to any stranger in the grocery store and just grab them by the butt or on some other part of their body. You can't do that to anybody. There's nobody you can do that except to yourself. So even if you've been married to somebody for 30 years, if they don't want that, you can't do it, can you? Do you have a right to do it if they don't want it? You don't have a right to do it. They have to be in agreement to it, the same as the person at the grocery store. What I'm saying is that with the person at the grocery store, the total stranger, sexual activity with that person is not completely out of the question, is it? But what does it depend on? It depends on the person wanting it for herself or himself. It depends on the other person wanting it for himself or herself. And that's true for wives and husbands, boyfriends and girlfriends. Is it starting to kick in the truth of what I've just told you? Maybe you've never thought about it before. Because unhealthy people have the natural tendency to believe that a relationship gives them inherent rights over other people. And it does not. The relationship changes nothing except for the intimacy and the feelings involved. That's it. But as far as how you treat somebody you're very familiar and close to, the model should be no different whatsoever than the way you talk to and treat total strangers. It should not be that you speak to somebody at the bank with deep respect and patience and kindness, and then come home and fail to do that to your children or to your spouse or to your girlfriend. Why? Because your obligations to people don't change just because you're in a relationship with them. The way you view people doesn't change just because you're in a relationship with them. You see, in the one example at the store, why are you speaking to that person with respect and everything? Because naturally, you view them as having their own individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority. They don't belong to you, do they? Why does that fall away with a lot of people when they then turn and interact with somebody that they share a relationship with? Children, spouses, uncles, aunts, cousins. It changes because then there's a view of rights where there are none. So an unhealthy person will view the relationship as granting them rights and power, ownership over a person. But in the emotionally healthy way of thinking, do we possess any ownership over other people? No, not even when you're in a relationship with them. And that is the big difference, that shift in thinking that happens with an unhealthy person. Is that on the one hand, I view you as, you don't belong to me. I don't have any rights over you. Oh, you're my cousin, or you're my adult child, or you're my spouse. We're in a relationship. Now I have inherent rights over you. You're a possession of mine. That's why that happens. But what is the healthy attitude? The healthy attitude is just like the person at the store. I have no rights over her. I don't own her. She's not a possession of mine. I go home. I see my mother. I have that same attitude toward my mother. She is a standalone individual. I have no rights over her. I don't own her. She's not a possession. Or, an adult child or a spouse or anything like that. So, think about that. We'll talk about it more. You have no more rights over people you're in a relationship with than you do with total strangers out in public. That would warrant some deep meditation and rumination to see if your behaviors are reflecting that attitude. The law of genuine attitude reflection, we mentioned it earlier. Your natural behaviors do not betray whatever your true underlying attitudes are that you live with toward any given thing. Some examples of passive-aggressive behaviors. A woman being purposely quiet and untalkative so that her husband will ask her what is wrong is passive-aggressive communication behavior style. Now, you'll hear some people talk about passive-aggressiveness. I typically don't talk about passive-aggressiveness. I talk about passive-aggressive communication behavior styles. Why do I do that? Because when you talk about passive-aggressiveness, we're really talking about communication, and communication can be performed simply by behaviors. So a person who is living with a passive-aggressive communication behavior style will often use their behaviors to attempt to communicate. We do it all the time. It's in our facial expressions, it's in the way we move our hands and all these things. The behavior is also communicating things. Well, unhealthy people will use their behaviors to try to communicate something in a clandestine way to get people to figure out what it is they want or what they're thinking or any of these things. Calm assertive, remember that's the kryptonite, the passive-aggressive communication behavior style. Calm assertive communication behavior style is when the woman, instead of being quiet and untalkative to try to provoke her husband and asking her what's wrong, the calm assertive communication behavior style is when she simply says to her husband, "Dear, something's bothering me. I'd like to tell you about it." That's it. It's calm assertive. I'm not going to try to make you figure out. I'm not going to make you try to solve a mystery here. I'm just going to come out and discuss it. A man wants to borrow $5 from a friend, so he talks about how much he wishes he had $5, rather than simply asking his friend to loan it to him. That is passive-aggressive communication behavior style. You call your elderly mom, and she spends half of the call complaining that nobody ever checks up on her or just calls to talk, rather than simply coming right out and telling you, daughter or son, I wish you'd call more often. See, that's passive-aggressive communication behavior style. The calm, assertive communication behavior style would be her just coming right out and saying, I wish you'd call more often. A father sees a woman with her hair a certain way, and he tells his daughter, "Look at that lady. Look at how she has her hair. What a slut." That's passive-aggressive communication behavior style, because he could just simply come right out and say, "Please don't ever wear your hair like that. I don't like that style." A mother bangs pots and pans, hoping her family will ask her what's wrong so she can complain about feeling unappreciated, rather than simply telling her family that she feels unappreciated. It's an example of passive-aggressive communication behavior style. A husband complains that his food is cold, hoping that his wife will feel bad and get up and heat his food in the microwave, rather than simply saying, "Honey, would you mind heating this up for me?" A guy complains that he's tired and just wants to chill, but then gets mad when his wife pokes her head in the study and asks him a question. He wanted her to deduce from the things he said earlier that he wanted to be left alone for a while. Passive-aggressive communication behavior style. What would be the calm, assertive communication behavior style? Just coming right out and saying, "Listen, it's been a long day, and I don't want to be bothered for a little bit, okay?" Religious people will sometimes use prayer as a means to lecture those listening. What is the purpose of prayer? The purpose of prayer is to discuss things with God, right? You're talking directly to God. But instead, people will use prayer as a method. They're not really talking to God. They're really lecturing those listening to the prayer. Be careful not to do that. Almost all passive-aggressive communication behavior is based on an unreasonable and false expectation that other people should intuitively know what we're feeling and thinking. That's another way of describing that is mind reading. And that coming right out and asking for something or expressing something cheapens the value of the thing we want. Because if a person can't read our mind and we have to tell it to them, it's proof they don't love us. And we're worthless, because if they loved us enough, they would know exactly what we wanted. False reasoning, false expectations, reasoning built on complete impossibilities and falsehood. Nobody can read other people's minds. It's also very irresponsible. Irresponsible people do this. Why? Because they want other people to supply them their needs and stuff like that, rather than just taking control, assuming responsibility over their own wants and needs, and getting those things met. Being in charge of getting those things met for themselves. That's the responsible way, which is the calm, assertive way. The passive-aggressive or irresponsible way is other people need to do it for me. They need to know what I want, know what I need, and provide it for me. And if they don't love me. That's a very childish, irresponsible way of thinking. All right, power over thoughts. Here's the thing about that, and this will put a big bow on this whole conversation. We're not prisoners to our thoughts. All the time I've had to explain, we have full control over what we allow ourselves to continue thinking. What this means effectively is that we have full control over our thoughts. Now, the counter-argument often is, well, if you ask me to not think of a purple gorilla, that's the first thing I think of. I don't choose it, it just happens. Well, that's true. But you're not then thereafter a slave to the purple gorilla. You can recognize that you're thinking about a purple gorilla, and you can choose to stop thinking about the purple gorilla and choose to think about something entirely different. You have full control over what you allow yourself to continue thinking. So recognizing what one is thinking, or even how one is choosing to think about a thing, gives you great power. What are your options once you recognize what you're thinking or how you're thinking? Number one, you can choose to not allow yourself to continue thinking about that. Number two, you can choose to think about something entirely different. Number three, you can choose to allow yourself to continue thinking about the same thing, but to choose to think about it in a different way. That's what I call the how we choose to think about a thing. In a recent orange slice, we talked about this as being some of the most powerful tools in your toolbox that all people possess. Let's talk about like anxiety, for example, as a way to illustrate you having full control over how you choose to think about a thing. So let's say that your anxiety, remember, you don't have control over your feelings, so you don't have control over the anxiety directly. But where do all of our feelings come from? They come from our thoughts. Yes, everything you feel is born from your thoughts, and we have full control over our thoughts. So let's say that your anxiety is being born from the thought. Let's say that, so you're anxious, and you do an analysis, and you say to yourself, I don't have any control over my feelings, so I'm not going to try to control my anxiety. But I am going to try to figure out what thoughts am I having are giving birth to the anxiety. I can control my thoughts. And you realize that the thoughts that you're having is that people are judging you. I'm having these thoughts that people are judging me, and that is giving birth to this anxiety. Now let's say that upon analysis, you say, is what I'm thinking True or false? Are people judging me? That would be the first step, right? Because what if you do an analysis and you realize people aren't judging me? They're not judging me at all. And you have that realization. Well, what you've just done is you've corrected an erroneous thought, right? And then what happens to the anxiety? The anxiety subsides. Because when your thoughts change, the feelings being born from thoughts also change. So that's one thing. Is the thought accurate or inaccurate? And you do an analysis and you say, no, nobody's judging me. But here's something interesting. What if you do an analysis and you come to the conclusion that the thinking is accurate? Meaning, all evidence points to and supports the idea that people really are judging you. Now what to do? Now what to do? Well, this is where our having full power over how we think comes into play. The question then is it healthy to care about what people think in this way? Is it healthy to care what people think about you in this way? The answer is no. You see, because your sense of value is tied in what you imagine they think. And if they're judging you and thinking negatively of you and everything, what are you doing? You're giving value to people's thoughts in a way that that their thoughts do not possess that value in real life. You're granting it that power over you. It doesn't matter what people think. What other people think of you has no effect whatsoever on your value. So again, is it healthy to care whether people are judging you? No, that's not healthy. So you see that it's not what you are thinking that needs to be corrected, because it may be true. Maybe people are judging you. But it's how you are thinking that needs to be corrected, rather than what you are thinking. Do you see it? How you are thinking is that the fact that they're judging you is important. It matters. When the reality is that what they think does not matter. It does not have any effect on your value. So notice what I just said. In this situation, it is how you are thinking that needs to be corrected, rather than what you are thinking. Why? Because what you're thinking apparently is accurate. You're not wrong. The people really are judging you in this scenario. But when you sit and you think about it longer, you say, yes, but the way I'm thinking, how I'm thinking about this is not healthy, because I'm placing importance on what other people think in an unhealthy way. Therefore, I need to stop doing that. I need to remind myself of why what other people think do not matter in that way. What is the way that what other people think does matter? Now let me see if I can reword that. In what way do the things other people think matter? I'm going to tell you. In that it tells us about them. What other people think reveals things to us about them. It does not reveal things to us about us, only about them. So if you're interested in other people, if you love people, if you would like to get to know people for who they are and those sorts of things, what makes them them, then in that case, what other people think is very valuable. It matters very much, because that's the only way you get to know other people. But as far as what other people think defining you, that's not happening. That can't happen. It's impossible for that to happen. So, some deep points there. Pay attention not to just what you're thinking, but how you're thinking. And remind yourself that you have full control over what you continue to allow yourself thinking, and over how you choose to think about things. That is power over thoughts. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the program. I appreciate you guys joining me for this episode of the Last Symptom Podcast, and I hope you'll join us over there on our very wonderful online community on Locals, because that's where everything's happening these days as far as the last symptom goes. Do something nice for yourselves this weekend, and I'll see you real soon right here on the Last Symptom Podcast.